Good morning, Hayom Yom, Tes Vuv Sivan. So in today's Hayom Yom, the Rebbe tells us the teaching style of the Alter Rebbe and how it evolved over the years. And the Alter Rebbe's predecessors, the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, so they taught everything very succinctly. The way they taught, everything was very short, very packed, very powerful, very inspirational. So in the beginning, the Alter Rebbe emulated their style, and in the early years, his teachings, his Maimarim, they were called Drachim, paths. Every teaching was a path. And it says that those teachings were very, very short. There were a couple of words, there were a couple of lines, and again, they were very short. They were like sound bites, they were bite-sized, and there was a lot packed into them. It was a big punch, but it was only a couple of words. And it says they were very, very powerful, very inspirational, and the listeners would be set on fire by them. They were really inspiring, they would really set you on fire, they would really set your mind on fire, set your mind ablaze. Then as the years went on, so the Alter Rebbe stuck to this core style, but he started playing around a little bit, he started developing a little bit more, and he stuck to the core style, but they became a little bit longer, a little bit more developed, and these were called igres, these were called letters. And again, he stuck to the core principle and the core style of teaching of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid of his early years, but they were a little longer, a little more developed, just a bit more. Then though, as the years went on, the Alter Rebbe started really going his own way, really developing his own style of teaching, his own style of developing Torah, and his new style was called Teiris. And this was not yet him fully developed, this was not his own full style that he would eventually reach, but it was the beginning of the end, it was the beginning of the Alter Rebbe style. And over here, ideas were really, really mapped out and fleshed out and developed. And the Rebbe writes that these Teiris served as the core and as the basis, and the style and the structure and the teachings then served as the core and the basis for the Alter Rebbe's Maimarim in Torah Ar and the Likutei Torah, which is basically the main book, the main sefer of the Alter Rebbe's Maimarim. All of the Alter Rebbe's core Maimarim are basically in Torah Ar and the Likutei Torah. Then though, as the years went on, the Alter Rebbe finally really found his own style and went his own way and developed the style of Chabad, and those were called not Teiris, but those were called Ksavim, long essays. And there, all the ideas were really mapped, really fleshed out, really developed, fully fleshed out, fully developed. And the Rebbe just concludes by saying it was relatively developed compared to his early years and compared to his predecessors, but the Alter Rebbe himself, compared to the future Rebbeim, especially compared to the Middle Rebbe who would come next, he was like very succinct in comparison to the future Rebbeim and to the Middle Rebbe. They really, really wrote things out at length and really spelled things out. But in comparison to what came earlier, the Alter Rebbe was very revolutionary. He was really spelling things out in very simple terms, so to speak, relatively, and really fleshing ideas out and really spelling them out and developing them. Now, it's interesting that there is another Hayom Yom entry, the entry of Yud Beis Cheshvan, where over there it says that in the early years, the Alter Rebbe had a style of teaching known as Verter, which means like a few words. And it basically sounds like there's a fifth style of teaching, or maybe it's a different name for one of these, I don't know, but it says, in Yud Beis Cheshvan, it says there's another style called Verter. Now, just very interesting thing is that from all the Rebbeim, I believe, to the best of my knowledge, that the only other Rebbe to ever attempt anything like the Alter Rebbe, to ever emulate the style, is our Rebbe in the book Hayom Yom, which is the first book the Rebbe ever wrote. He wrote it in his early years, so to speak. And this is the only other book, other than the books from the early years of the Alter Rebbe, which I think is in the same style as the Alter Rebbe, that you have a full thought in 3 lines, and 4 lines, and 2 lines. And it's a very unique style, and it's very interesting that the Rebbe did this as well in his early years. Now, the Frieidker Rebbe once explained that, in other words, the difference between the Alter Rebbe style and the other Rebbeim style, and the pros and cons behind teaching everything very succinctly versus spelling everything out and developing everything, is he says the other Rebbeim, they weren't addressing every time they talked in a specific maimer, in a specific sicha, they weren't addressing every person in the crowd or every chassid who would ever read that maimer, literally their specific issues. They were generally giving guidance to everyone. Everyone could get something out of every maimer and every sicha. Everyone could glean something. Everyone could use it in their life. But they weren't catering the maimer, so to speak, to every person. And talk. Certain maimer were dealing with certain issues or certain lifestyle. Certain maimer and sichas were addressed to another person, another lifestyle, and that's the way it was. The Alter Rebbe, though, he was personally catering every word he said, every message he ever said, to every person in the room. to every chassid that was there, to every chassid that would ever live. Like the Alter Rebbe writes in his introduction to Tanya, that Tanya is meant for any person that will ever live, for any issue any chassid will ever have. They can find the answers in Tanya if they dig deep. Now, because of this, when you're trying to speak once, and that should address every possible person, every possible issue, so you have to speak a little bit in riddles. Everything has to be very shorthand, very succinct. This is why very cryptic. This is why, like the Bible, the Torah is written very cryptically, and the Tanya is written very cryptically, because that way, when you write things very shorthand, when you write things very cryptically, there's many nuances and many allusions, and it contains a lot more layers, a lot more meaning. And that way, you can address many different people at once. You can talk about many different issues at once with only a few words. While, as opposed to if you spell everything out, so while your meaning will be very, very clear, the problem with spelling things out and being very explicit is you're only saying what you're saying. That's why it's so clear, because all the other you're not saying anything else. You're just saying this idea. So it's so easy to follow what you're saying because you're only saying one idea. As opposed to when you're trying to throw in 1,000 ideas into one's talk, it's very confusing if I'm listening, because I have to discern the one message for me and I have to block out all the noise, all the other 999 ideas, and that's very hard to do. That takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of concentration and effort. As opposed to if you spell things out, then I hear the one idea you're saying, and it's easy to follow. But the downside of that is you're only saying one idea, so you cannot be addressing everybody with all their issues with that one idea. You can only be addressing one person with their issue, or 5% of people. So even though it helps a lot of people, it carries a lot less. There's a lot less of a punch in that idea, as opposed to the Alter Rebbe's early Maimarim and the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid and perhaps the Hayom Yom. Things are very succinct because they contain a message for everyone, and they're individually catering to and addressed to every single person. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.